What are you doing? You want to be in the video? Hey, Slynk here with another video, and today I want to talk about some of the frequently asked questions I got on my last video about Duck Buddy. Some of you had some burning questions, and I saw a lot of the same questions over and over, so we're going to talk about some of those. And also, I'd like to introduce you to a new Max for Live device that we've cooked up called Duck Call, which listens to an audio channel, and every time it hears some audio, it sends a MIDI note to a Duck Buddy or anything else for that matter, so that you can use Duck Buddy with audio drums. But before we talk about all that, I just want to say a big thanks to everyone who left a nice comment on the Duck Buddy video, and I got an overwhelmingly positive reaction to the Duck Buddy video and the Duck Buddy device as well. It's a free plugin, but some of you guys were like, shut up and take my money. I really appreciate that as well. So yeah, thank you for that. But I couldn't have made Duck Buddy alone, obviously. So thanks again to Jarlik and Iggy Labs and everyone else on my Discord server that helped out. Speaking of people who are helping me out, I'd like to thank the sponsor for this video, Dawnation. Or to be more specific, the Alien Weapon Walkthrough, which is an 8-part video walkthrough by AU5, made in collaboration with Dawnation, where he breaks down every fancy sound design and mixdown trick from his song Alien Weapon. And if you've seen AU5's YouTube channel, then you know this dude has all the crazy tips and tricks. He's definitely known as a sound design monster and a great teacher. There is also an Alien Weapon sample pack created from the song itself, and the full Alien Weapon Ableton project file, which are both available as optional add-ons. I think being able to see a professionally mixed and mastered project file for a top tier song is sick. I mean, this track was released on Excision's label Subsidia. This is a great opportunity to learn from the best. So use my link in the description and score a 55% discount, support AU5, support me, and at the same time, level up your music production skills with the Alien Weapon walkthrough. Well, there were a few comments from people that were personally offended that I said LFO Tool sucks, which I think is pretty funny. But let me clarify. I don't think LFO Tool sucks. I think all VST sidechainers suck. But, you know, it's not Steve Duda's fault. The VST framework doesn't allow plugins access to the kind of information that we need to make something like Duck Buddy work. You know, you put a VST on a channel and it does a thing. It doesn't necessarily have access to what's happening on the other channels. And every DAW handles channels differently. So it just doesn't work. One idea I did have to get around this limitation would be to make a second VST that you could run alongside LFO Tool, for example. And this imaginary VST that doesn't exist would be called something like LFO Tool MIDI sender, right? And you'd put the LFO Tool MIDI sender on a MIDI channel and it would rebroadcast the MIDI signal to your other LFO tools in the project and trigger them. So I thought that was a pretty good idea, and I sent an email to Steve Duda last year about it, and he replied with, I've wanted to add instance communication to LFO Tool at some point. It's a little complicated for what you're after because there is no promise on DAW process order on plugins. So for example, a servant instance could be processing a given time slice before the main instance. So the secondary instance would not know to retrigger. So he's basically saying that there'd be unpredictable latency. And for something like sidechain, we need a very predictable accurate latency. But one thing that is in the VST framework that VST plugins could have is look ahead and smoothing. I mean, let's get some look ahead on LFO Tool. Let's get some smoothing algorithms on LFO Tool instead of the crazy workflow that you got to go through. For those of you who are commenting things like, please make Duck Buddy into a VST so I can use it in Fruity Loops and whatever, I would if I could, but it just wouldn't be as cool. Again, like Max for Live is so deeply integrated into Ableton, we have access to the information we need. It just will never be a VST. And for the same reason that it only works on Ableton 11 and doesn't work on Ableton 10, in Ableton 10, we don't have that access to the different MIDI channels. You can't select a MIDI channel on a Max for Live device. It just doesn't work in Ableton 10. So that's why I've been waiting until now to make this device, because now we actually have the ability to do it in Ableton 11. Did you know that you can use Duck Buddy as a transient shaper? Some people in the comments figured it out, but let me show you how it's done. It's pretty simple, really. We just throw a Duck Buddy on our drum rack right after our kick drum here. And if we go into the input, select the drums channel, which we're on, and the drum rack kick pre-effects. Now, every time I click the play button on this kick cell or trigger it with a MIDI note, it also triggers the duck buddy to do its volume shaping. Now, I can tell just by looking at the sampler that the sample is somewhere between 200 and 300 milliseconds. So I'm going to set the length of our duck buddy volume curve to be 250 milliseconds. And then we'll just draw in a transient shape like that. Okay. So now we've got a shaped transient, and the depth knob kind of becomes an amount, I guess you could say. You can kind of hear more of the boom of the kick there like that. So what's really good is to use a glue compressor in soft clipping mode to kind of bring the volume up of the rest of the kick a little bit. Not too much, don't overdo it. There we go. Let's put that in a rack, turn it off. Transient shaping. Duck Buddy can do it all, let me tell you. Let's set this to the snare. Let's try a deeper depth. Oh, that's pretty snappy right there. Cool, let's record that. Just so we can see what we've done, and we'll record a version without the transient shaping as well, so we can see the difference. And that's pretty cool. Look at that. It's definitely shaping that transient. There's a nice spiky boy on the front of there. Really nice. So when we first started working on Duck Buddy, I really wanted it to be a mappable effect. Imagine mapping Duck Buddy to anything you like the volume of an EQ bell or the dry wet on a reverb or something crazy like that. Instead of just volume, it would have been really cool. But unfortunately, the process of mapping something causes an unreliable, unpredictable amount of latency, and that just doesn't cut it, especially for precise sidechaining that we were trying to do with Duck Buddy. But that doesn't mean we can't have fun with some creative effects. And we are planning on making a mappable Duck Buddy in the future. But for now, here's a little hack to get Duck Buddy mappable. So stay with me, it's kind of weird, but we're going to start with an operator, turn off all these other ones, and we'll just throw this into a square, fixed, and 0. So now if we play this synth, it's going to play a 0 hertz square wave. So it's doing a lot of volume there, but it's just kind of clicking. But that's fine, because the next effect we're going to add is the CV in. And this is usually used in conjunction with analog gear and voltage, yada yada, stuff I don't understand or have any experience with. I'm just using this purely as a hack. So we're going to select the operator and post effects and DC mode uni. So now when I play a note on this operator, this bad boy pops up like this. And as you can see, it's mappable. So now all we need to do is grab a Duck Buddy from our bass channel here. We'll just copy paste it right into the middle of that. And if we I'll just solo this and put a MIDI note in here, legato it so that the DC kind of 0 hertz square wave is always playing. So what's happening is this is sending this a signal, but it's being interrupted by the Duck Buddy. And so that kind of allows us to map the result of all of this to anything we like. What should we do? Let's put a frequency shifter on the bass line or something crazy, something really obvious, okay? And we'll map the CV in to the frequency. Very cool. We'll set this to 50% as the max. And I'll set this to 100%. So now the knob should go start at the top and then go down to 50. That's pretty cool. So there you go. I mean, the possibilities are kind of exciting and endless with this sort of setup. You can map this many things with one CV, but you could always just add or duplicate this entire channel and map a bunch of other things if you need to. Definitely play around with this. Super cool. If you don't have CV in, I think it's in the CV tools pack, which you can get, I think, for free from the Ableton website. So if you don't have this, that's where you'll get it from. Cool. lot of people said in the comments that the only feature they're missing in DuckBuddy is multiband. Well, redesigning DuckBuddy to include multiband, especially the GUI, would be really difficult to say the least. But also there's the question of how do we split the frequencies? Do we use linear phase EQs or not? How many bands do we have? You know, these are all questions that probably should be answered by the user, you, using DuckBuddy. So I think it's better to just leave DuckBuddy as a single band plugin as it is. And that way it's a little bit more modular. You can split the bands however you like using whatever method works for you. Let me show you what I mean. Probably the easiest way to set up a DuckBuddy in a multi-band sidechain situation is to just use a multi-band dynamics. So if we drag one of those in and throw it in rack and then macro the crossovers to macro 1 and 2, then what we can do is just open up the chain view. We'll rename this chain to lows, solo the lows, and then just throw a DuckBuddy in there. And then we can just duplicate this. We can call this one mids, solo the mids, duplicate that. You get the idea. Solo the highs, and that's it. Now we are sidechaining 3 different bands independently of one another. Now I know it's a bit clunky to flip through these different pages and adjust the curves and timings and things, but this does work. So if you absolutely do need multi-band sidechaining with DuckBuddy, this is how you would do it. And you could dress it up real nice. Maybe you could have a couple of these similar options here, like ramp, smooth, and look ahead, macroed as well. You know, you could have nice colors with, you know, you could make a really nice rack for yourself. So it's pretty simple. Or is it? Doing any sort of EQ, especially low and high pass filtering, like what we're doing here with these multi-band dynamics, introduces a lot of phase shifting. And phase shifting isn't necessarily always a bad thing. The human ear can't really hear a phase shift like this. We can't hear the difference between a saw wave like this and a saw wave that looks like this. The analyzer shows it to contain all the same frequencies at the same levels. So it's not affecting the sound exactly, it's just affecting the phase. And only in certain situations can a phase shift be detectable by the human ear. But if we end up running phase shift in parallel with a signal that has not been phase shifted, for example, if I take this whole rack, put it in another rack, and then create a dry chain, you can see that there are some really bad notch filters here that are just carving up the signal and changing it dramatically. So we're mixing a dry signal with a phase shifted signal, and that's a big no-no. You never want to do that. If you absolutely need to set up something like that, then you're going to need to use a linear phase EQ. But otherwise, splitting up the frequencies like this is perfectly fine, especially for sidechaining compression like DuckBuddies. If we put DuckBuddies on all 3 of these chains, you know, we'd be cutting the mids and cutting the lows and stuff like that. It's going to be great. Now, multiband dynamics has I think it's a 24 per octave low pass and high pass filter curves. So they're quite sort of shallow curves. If we wanted something a little steeper and more accurate, I would recommend using an EQ3 on 48 dB per octave curves, because look at that cut. That's really nice. It carves out a big chunk, and that's what you want, especially in the low end. We've got these crossovers all set to the same. So 120 Hertz is the low crossover. So this is 120 Hertz here. And, you know, 80 Hertz is starting to disappear. It's not the greatest. So you might want to set the crossover a little higher than what you actually think you need. But what you definitely do not want to do is set up a frequency split rack with an EQ8, which is what I've done here, because the crossovers have not been calculated correctly. So you can see right where these bumps are, right here at 2,500 Hertz and 120 Hertz, which is where I have these crossovers set. There's little bumps in volume. And that's because the combination of, you know, this curve and the other curve that goes this way is actually boosting the volume there. So your best bet is EQ3 or MBD. Now, if you absolutely do need to use a linear phase EQ for your frequency split rack because you plan on running a parallel signal, and if you don't use a linear phase, you'll be introducing crazy notch filters, then I would recommend using something like this, which I found for free online. It's called Q-Range. Ableton doesn't come with a linear phase EQ at all, so you have to find something else. I think it's possible to make a Max for Live linear phase EQ, and I'm very interested in maybe trying that out in the future, but for now, I found Q-Range. It's free. I'll put a link in the description, and it does linear phase EQing. So that's great. Let's turn it on. And right away, when we turn it on, you can see that the phase is maintained. And if I turn this mid band down the phase is maintained. It just flipped because of the way the oscilloscope works, but we are cutting the mids out, which is great. We're cutting the lows out. It's doing a really good job of that, actually, maintaining the phase throughout. So that's great. Would recommend Q range. Now, some of you in the comments might be typing away right now. Hey, Slynk, you can probably make a linear phase EQ frequency split rack by inverting polarity and blah, blah, blah. I've set up a rack that does just that, the way that I've seen people do it on YouTube, and I've called it Walmart phase because it doesn't fucking work, man. Okay, let me explain to you how this is set up and we'll compare it to this. So we've got our highs, mids and lows. All I'm doing is soloing each band, okay, on these three. Now the same is happening over here on the high and the low band, but on the mid band, what I've done is I'm soloing the low and high and then inverting the polarity of those bands and then mixing them with a dry signal. So what's happening is I'm flipping upside down the lows, flipping upside down the highs, and then mixing them with the non-flipped versions of that. And those two bands are canceling each other out, and we're being left with the mids. And also what's being canceled out here is the effect and the phase shifting of these EQs that we have here. And that's why this is showing a perfect saw wave. It's sort of appearing to be a linear phase EQ frequency split rack, but you'll see in a sec that this is fucking broken. Actually, before I even do anything, look at this weird little bump here. I mean, I don't know what's going on there, but okay, let's turn the mids down really slowly. Okay, look what's happening over here. Why is 5K dropping suddenly? Really sharp notch filter drops, pops back up, and now the mid-range starts to disappear. Okay, that was really weird. That's not exactly what we want at all. Let's turn the highs down. Oh no, we've got another notch filter and a big boost. This is the opposite of a frequency split rack. This is a notch filter rack, okay? And let's turn the lows down. That does nothing except turn the lows up. So we're not getting the useful bands that we want. Although it does sum to a linear phase version of the same signal, we're not left with usable bands that actually do stuff for us, because I can't turn this down and have just the mids and highs. I can't turn the mids down without creating a crazy notch filter. We're doing something, inverting it again, and then we're left with the same signal essentially, but we've got it split into 3 chains that aren't even usable. It's like smashing a mirror and then gluing it back together again. Like it was a waste of time because you can't use the pieces of the mirror individually. I don't know, that's a terrible analogy, but hopefully all of this makes sense. And sorry about the long segue into linear phase EQ and frequency split racks. I think for most people, the EQ3 frequency split rack is going to be great for multiband Duck Buddy sidechain compression. But it kind of begs the question, why are we doing multiband sidechain compression anyway? I mean, a kick drum, like especially for kick drums and snares, they only last for 300 milliseconds or so, and they kind of cover most of the frequency spectrum anyway. So why not just duck the whole frequency spectrum at once? It's done and over so quick that you don't even notice it happened. There isn't really much to gain by using a multiband, but I do understand using multiband sidechain compression for something like vocals against a synth chord. You know, you'd want to carve out the 2K area for the vocals to punch through against that synth chord. But in that application, I don't think I'd be using Duck Buddy because Duck Buddy only accepts MIDI signals. And as you know, audio is not MIDI. Vocals are not MIDI. So I would just use a regular stock Ableton compressor in that case. So do we need a multi-band version of Duck Buddy? Probably not. And if you do really want a multi-band version of Duck Buddy, just chuck it in a rack. Don't worry about phase shifting. It's not that big of a deal. Okay. Okay. So I had a lot of comments from people telling me that I was using the Ableton compressors wrong. So let's talk about it, shall we? In the video, I said that the compressor has to finish listening to the kick drum before the release time starts, and that you can never get a release time shorter than the kick drum because the release time is tied to the length. And a lot of you people were saying that I should try using the EQ feature on the compressor, and that way you can get shorter release times and avoid using ghost notes altogether. So let's try it out, shall we? I've got the Live 8 and the Live 9 compressors here. We'll start with the Live 8. So I'll flip open this, select the drums, turn the EQ on and the headphone button, and we'll just set up like a negative infinity ducking. And I've just got a kick drum and a sub here. Pretty simple stuff. So let's listen to the sub channel only, solo. And we'll tweak the EQ so that we get the very tippy top transient. So you can see here on this gain reduction meter that we're actually hitting negative 38 dB in gain reduction. Negative infinity gain reduction is technically negative 68 dB in Ableton land. So this is a little shy, and I don't know what else I can do. I've cranked the Q to the max. I'm trying to get the shortest transient possible, but it's really dependent on the kick drum. Let's try this other kick I have in this rack here. Negative 32. Okay, so that one has a different amount of gain reduction. So yeah, this inconsistency is one of the first reasons why I like to use ghost notes rather than this EQ hack or trick that you guys so kindly pointed out to me over and over in the comment section. But yeah, this isn't going to work. So let's just record it and I'll show you what's happening here. We'll turn the headphone button off and you can see that we are not ducking completely. I want to see a flat line there for at least some portion of this area when the kick is playing, but it's not ducking deep enough. And that's not going to cut it really when I'm playing a 0 dB sub and a 0 dB kick. I want one to completely cancel out the other one. And I'm not able to achieve that with this EQ. With a ghost note, I can set the volume of the transient, the click, I guess, that triggers the sidechain compressor. I can set it to 0 dB or loud as I want it to be, and I'll get consistent results every time, no matter the kick sample, no matter the sub, it'll always be the same. Now, some of you guys were talking about how I should try to use the attack on the Live 9 compressor because I was saying that I always get clicks with the Live 9 compressor. That's true. You were saying just turn the attack up. Okay, let's try it out, shall we? We'll set the sidechain up to the drums, threshold to negative infinity, and we'll turn the attack down all the way first so we can see what we're starting with. A massive click. Okay, huge click. All right, let's turn the attack up. Now we have a look ahead of 10 milliseconds. I can see that there is about 5 milliseconds of time here. So maybe I can only really get away with 5 or 6, but maybe I'll just play it and turn this up until I can stop hearing the click, and then we'll record it and see what happens. Okay, I'm not hearing any clicks at 14 milliseconds. That seems like a really high attack time. So let's record it and see what we're looking at. Oh, you know, that's really not too bad, to be honest. It's pretty sharp on the tip there, but that's actually not too bad. Now, I got to admit, you guys are right on that one. But to be fair, if you combine this with the EQ feature, like we were doing before, it totally breaks everything. Look at this. So let me just solo that. Okay, so look, we're only getting negative 4 dB of gain reduction now because of this attack. See, when I turn the attack down, now we're getting negative 48. So that means I can't use the attack feature with the EQ feature because the attack kind of, I guess, adds attack to the incoming signal. I'm not really sure how the attack is actually working here, but it's definitely not doing what I want because this is the result. We're not getting nearly enough gain reduction. So another good reason to use ghost notes. I want to show you something else that someone mentioned in the comments. So if we take a look at this Live 9 compressor, there's actually a button down here called logarithmic or linear. So we can flip modes. So there, you can see that the curves are a little different, but I found that I got way worse clicks with the linear mode versus the logarithmic mode. So I mean, yeah, I still think there's utility in the Live 8 compressor, and using the Live 8 and the Live 9 compressors, depending on the situation, one's going to be better than the other. But I just wanted to show you that I do actually know how to use the compressor, but I will admit that I forgot about these features because it's been so long since I have tested them out that I kind of forgot why I stopped using them. And now that I'm testing them out again, I'm remembering why I don't use them. Ghost notes, they're a little bit inconvenient, but not as inconvenient as constantly tweaking this frequency EQ thing to get the right amount of gain reduction and the attack to avoid the clicks and stuff like that. It's just not worth it. I want to just slap a rack in and get done with sidechain, you know? Enough about all that. Let's check out the new plugin Duck Call. So I'm just going to drag it onto this kick channel. As you can see, I've got all of my drums written in audio. So these are all audio files. There's no MIDI to be found here. And I would love to use a Duck Buddy, but there's no MIDI. So I really have two options here. Create a new MIDI channel and just key in the MIDI notes for every time a kick drum plays, or I can use Duck Call. So this is Duck Call, and I'm just going to solo the kick channel so you can see what's happening. And I'll bring the threshold down slowly here. So you can see with the threshold set here, it's only catching the loudest kicks and not catching these like quieter ghost kicks. But if I set this down even lower to around here, now we're sort of getting like large boxes because our length is too long. So we'll set this to a shorter length. There we go. We're catching all those drum hits. We can also convert these MIDI notes that it's sending out of here to velocity as well. So you can see some of those notes are quieter, some of them are louder in velocity. And then all there is to do is go over to our Duck Buddy on our bass line. Obviously we want to sidechain our kicks to our bass line. So we'll just choose kick and Duck Call. It's already selected by default. So there we go. Now we're sidechaining with audio. And we can duplicate this, put another Duck Call on the snare, make sure we set it up right. Yeah, it looks like it's triggering. And we'll just select the snare now with the Duck Call on it. Beautiful. Yeah, Duck Call makes converting audio into MIDI pretty easy. Got a little filter section here, so you can turn on a high pass filter and really try to catch the transient, kind of like what we were doing earlier with the compressor in the EQ section here. So it works very similar to that, and you can click the headphone button to listen in on what you're doing. So for example, we're on the snare right now. So, you know, we can catch the transient. What we can also do is benchmark this. How accurate is this? So let's create a new MIDI channel and I'll select the input as our, let's say our kick, and automatically it selects the Duck Call. And we can actually just throw an analog on here and listen to what happens. Pretty cool. You can actually record this too. So we can convert this to MIDI by recording it. And if we take a look at this clip, we can zoom in and see how accurate it is. And you can see it's pretty accurate. I mean, that's almost dead on the grid line. If you did want to tighten that up a bit, there's a couple options in here. Turn on a look ahead. I reckon a 1 millisecond look ahead is probably enough to cover that gap. We can record it and benchmark it again, zoom in. Oh, that's so close. I mean, it's almost dead on. Hey, let's go 2 milliseconds. Okay, we've gone a little over. I mean, it's like we're talking milliseconds here, but luckily we have a delay on, so we can set this to 1/2 millisecond. Right on the grid line, pretty much. I mean, that's pretty close. Let's just call that. Creating a Max for Live transient detector from scratch is kind of a tall order. So this doesn't necessarily detect transients, but it detects over thresholds. So this is going to work the best on audio tracks that have single samples spattered across them. It's not going to work as well for drum loops. It does kind of work, and you can kind of isolate some of the frequencies with the filter to catch the right drum at the right time, but it's not the greatest at dealing with drum loops. So this is really meant to be used for your Mr. Bill types that like to do their their drums in audio. But I think we can do other creative things with this. Like, for example, if we wanted to trigger some kind of other sound or synth whenever the snare plays, I don't know why we're doing that, but maybe some kind of twinkly tail thing, we could definitely use duck call and send the MIDI information out to a synth that plays like a white noise burst or something like that. I really want to just show it off, show you how it works, and then see what you guys come up with. I'd love to see what you guys can do with this thing. So let me know in the comments if you discover a really cool use for duck call. For now, it's just fulfilling a very sought after feature request in the comments section from the previous video. So that's duck call. You can find a link to download it in the description. There'll also be a link in the description to our sponsor, doornation.net. Make sure you go and check them out. I'll put a link in the description for that free VST linear phase EQ as well. And if you want to come and hang out with me and Jarlik and Iggy Labs and some of the other new faces on the Max for Live channel in my Discord server and create Max for Live devices with us, you'd be very much welcome. So come and hang out with us. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something with Duck Buddy as well. And take it easy. Peace.